Welcome back to Anxious Faith. This episode, we are excited to be talking about something that we're hearing a lot of these days in culture, in the world, when we're talking about mental health, and that's gratitude. We're seeing messages and people coming out with talks, videos, all that kind of stuff, that gratitude is actually one of the biggest ways that we can be combating our negative mental health. The way that we can be talking back against feelings of anxiety and depression and things like that is to be focusing on gratitude for what we have, looking at the things that we are grateful for in our lives. But as Christians, that might sometimes be a bit of a distraction, because the message that we are being told by culture is to look around our lives and to see what we are grateful for. But as Christians, is that what we should be looking for in terms of our gratitude? And does focusing on gratitude have that kind of same positive effect on us? So we're going to chat today with Stephen Unwin. Stephen is, for full disclosure, actually part of the Our Daily Bread Ministries team. He's an editor and a content manager for Our Daily Bread. He's also part of the Anxious Faith team here with us. He helps us work through our content direction and our theological overview as well. So Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. Stephen also, in his spare time, or what little we've left him, is also studying a PhD where he is actually looking at gratitude, and that's why I want to talk to you today. So, Stephen, thank you for being with us. Thank you for being willing to chat with us and get us the early insight on your PhD research. Why don't you just start and give us just a little bit of an overview of who you are?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me on. It's I love chatting about gratitude. It's an interesting topic to chat about. So thank you for the chance. So I'm part of the team here at Anxious Faith and part of the team of Our Daily Bread as well. So I help across the region in terms of editing across Asia Pacific. So that's fun. So I have colleagues in lots of different countries and time zones and all of that. So that's pretty fun. And alongside that, I'm married to my wife, Katie, a very lovely lady. And we have a 10-month-old boy called Hamish, who is very lively and happy and content when he's not ill. You can probably, if you're watching on video, you can probably see his snot marks down my jumper.
I don't miss those stages of parenthood, let's be honest.
So, but yeah, also doing PhD where that fits in on the topic of gift and gratitude in Christian life. So that's a pretty fun topic to be studying.
Keen listeners will also pick up the fact that you are not perhaps sounding as Aussie as I do.
No, probably not.
How did you come to be here in Australia working with the team here?
Yeah, so my Australian accent is getting better and better when I start practicing it.
Yep.
Beginning to pick up the lingo. Originally from the UK.
Yep.
My wife and I moved over almost 3 years ago.
Yeah, well.
I think more than 3 years ago now. So we arrived the 1st of January 2020. Very
perfect time to move countries, right?
It was very good, very memorable date. At least when you need to do those forms, when did you arrive?
Yep.
You remember it. So I think we lost a day though coming, so that was a bit strange. But there you go. So we moved from the UK for my wife's work. She's a university lecturer, and we love living in Australia. It's a fun place. I can see why so many people make the move from the UK.
A little bit warmer sometimes.
It is a lot warmer. It's a lot drier as well. We lived in Wales, which is the wettest, rainiest bit of the UK, so that's quite a treat.
And so you've moved to Melbourne, which is, commonly referred to as the wettest, rainiest part of Australia.
Exactly, so. yeah.
You're setting yourselves up. So I want to talk about gratitude today, because this is one of the things that, as we talk about mental health, I see a lot of messages around these days in kind of a cultural discussion of mental health that, thankfully we are having really openly these days in this country. We're no longer kind of hiding the fact that people struggle with mental health issues, but we've kind of gone through the stage of going, well, is medical the answer, is that kind of thing, and going, well, yes, there are places for those, but what are things that people can be doing for themselves to be working on their own mental health, to try and help themselves deal with their mental health better? And one of these things that keeps coming up is the concept of gratitude. So Brene Brown's one of the big ones who's written a book about it. The Resilience Project here in Australia are another big one that people might know of, and their main speaker or their main topic is really around gratitude and empathy and mindfulness, and how those things really set ourselves up to kind of fight back against the mental malaise that our culture is kind of turning us into having. So I want to talk about this fact that gratitude is supposed to be this focus on things that I am grateful for kind of thing, trying to look at the positive side of thing. And that's supposed to try and help us out of perhaps mental slumps that we might be in. And we want to kind of have a conversation around whether that actually plays out for Christians. Is that something we should be leaning into as well? So obviously with your research, it's something that I think you'd be really great to talk about. Why don't you just let us, how did you come around to start deciding to do your PhD around gratitude and grace?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's quite difficult to think about how it starts, actually. It's probably something I've been looking at in kind of with serious attention for more than 10 years.
Okay.
So the PhD is relatively recent in that journey of thinking about gratitude. I remember sitting with a group of Christians after Bible study, typical thing that Christians get together to do. And it struck me that everyone in the group, there were people aged 20 to 80, all kinds of life circumstances, all kinds of cultural backgrounds, upbringings, etc. What struck me was that everyone's prayer started with thanksgiving.
Okay.
So they tend to say something like, "Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for ...
Yeah.
Father, thank you for ... And it struck me that all of us just very naturally started our prayer with thanksgiving. And then I started kind of thinking, well, actually, the idea of gratitude or saying thank you is so basic to so many aspects of life. One lady called Margaret Visser has suggested that thank you is probably the most common phrase we say in a day.
Yeah, wow.
We say it probably 100 times a day.
Yep.
Go to a coffee shop, you ask for a latte or whatever, flat white, delicious Melbourne coffee, and you say thank you when they accept your order. You probably say thank you when you pick it up.
Yep.
You might even say thank you to someone as they hold the door as you go out.
Yep.
So the idea of gratitude, saying thank you, is so basic to common life.
And it's almost probably one of those first words or concepts we teach our kids as well.
Yeah, indeed.
Ta. You know, when I hand you something, you say ta.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you can say, you try and teach children to say please and thank you from quite an early age. If I put you on the spot and asked you to, how many languages might you be able to say thank you in?
Maybe 3?
Yeah, that's pretty common.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in a group of people and I asked, I think there were probably 100 people there, how many languages do you think you can say thank you in? And I think there are about 40 languages.
Wow.
And those are 40 different languages.
Yeah.
So it seems like one of those words that is culturally kind of universal. And I just got me more and more interested because it's a really simple thing. Yep. Like a child can understand saying thank you.
Yeah.
But there's also so many complicated layers to it. So if you go on a bus or a train, there's funny signs that I find really amusing that say thank you for not smoking or thank you for not putting your feet on the bench or whatever, which is just really funny. It's kind of
passive-aggressive thankfulness.
Passive-aggressive thankfulness, which I find really funny. But I remember one of the things that specifically got me interested were, well, the two things. I'm sure we'll get onto more Bible passages later, but I remember looking at Romans chapter 1. Paul has this grand story of the story of sin, of our rebellion, our turning away from God, which seems a strange place to go when you're thinking about gratitude. But Romans 1 verse, chapter 1 verse 21, Paul says, at the end of this kind of grand story, and they neither glorified God nor gave him thanks.
Yeah, okay.
So right there at the kind of origin of sin, Paul says there's a sense of ingratitude. And I just thought, wow, that's striking for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
But then the other thing that got me into it and realizing there's so many complicated layers was in a very different area of life, which is a TV program called The Big Bang Theory. And there's this very funny episode called, I think it's called The Gift Giving Hypotheses or something like that. And it's this group of, if you've never watched the program, it's a group of scientists, kind of young 20-something scientists, going about their lives, and they meet this lady who lives across the way from their apartment called Penny, and this character called Sheldon and Penny are going to be giving Christmas gifts to each other.
Yep.
And Sheldon says, well, I've got to make sure my gift matches her gift because I don't want to be in debt to her.
Yeah.
And so he goes off to the shopping mall. It's American. He goes to like a bath kind of shop, chooses various like gift hampers. And he says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose all the gift hampers possible. Because then when she gives me a gift, I can match it perfectly. If it's a small gift, I can give her like a small $10 value gift.
Yeah.
If it's a really big gift, or maybe a $500 value gift. I'm going to beat her. I'm going to make sure I am matching her gift. It's this the episode unfolds, and it's all around this idea. And then she gets, it gets to the time when they're going to exchange their gifts. And Penny gives Sheldon a used napkin because she works at a factory restaurant called the Cheesecake Factory. And it's a used napkin. Like, what value is a used napkin? Intrinsically, it has no value at all.
Yep.
I mean, it's a piece of rubbish, literally, that you throw out. But she hands it to Sheldon and says, like, this guy called Leonard Nimoy, who is Sheldon's hero, favourite actor from Star Trek.
Star Trek, yep. The original Spock.
There you go, the original Spock. You know it better than me. And he came into the restaurant and used this napkin. And so she hands Sheldon this used napkin, and he is just obviously overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And he's this kind of socially awkward character. He's overwhelmed. He doesn't know what to do. It is his hero's thing, and he's got Leonard Nimoy's DNA. That's what he's so excited about. And so he runs off to his bedroom where he has all these gift hampers stored, and he comes back with all of them. Because there's no way he can match this gift. He just brings all of them. And there's this wonderful, very touching moment where he just says, thank you. But then it's really interesting because he then hugs her. And it's like the end of season 2. At this point, they've never hugged. Sheldon has never hugged or touched anyone. There's no kind of personal intimacy in that sense. So he hugs her. And it's like all he can give back is himself. That's all he can possibly offer.
Yeah, wow.
And it's this really touching moment. And it's also fascinating from a gift and gratitude perspective, because we talk about cancelling out a debt or whatever, gifts being equal to other gifts, but then gratitude shows this kind of, it suddenly brings these two people together in a way that they haven't been up until then. It suddenly speaks of this intimacy between these two people. It's far more than just saying thank you. It grows this intimate relationship between the two of them. And it also says something fascinating about gifts, because the value in a gift might not just be the intrinsic value.
Yeah, exactly.
So when I saw that story that I said, that really got my mind going. And that's probably what I've been thinking about ever since. So that maybe that story will end up in the PhD, I don't know. I'm not sure if you can quote the Big Bang Theory in a PhD.
You surely wouldn't be the first. Well, we've kind of been dancing around this, but let's maybe pull it back a layer or two, and let's talk about what gratitude actually is. Like, is it just a saying thank you when you get your coffee? Is it just a giving someone a gift, kind of because they've given you a gift? Yeah, what is gratitude? Yeah,
it's a really good question. It's a good question because that's to some extent what I'm trying to answer in the thesis, and it's proving a challenge. I think gratitude probably has multiple layers to it, which are all forms of gratitude. So gratitude is certainly saying thank you, but it also has to involve some sense of feeling, I think, in there as well, which is why psychologists are very interested in gratitude and what it does to relationships and all kinds of things. So it has to involve kind of acknowledgement, a saying thank you, I think is important. But then it has all kinds of different layers. So some people say gratitude is something like recognizing the good.
Yes.
It's a chap called Robert Emmons, and that's his kind of classic definition of gratitude is recognizing the good or acknowledging the good, which is to say that, in a very simple sense, there is good somewhere.
Yeah.
Someone has either given you a good, someone has done something good for you. So gratitude has this sense of recognition.
Yep.
It's more than just a appreciation.
Okay.
There's an expression or an expressive aspect to it.
Yeah.
So you might appreciate that something is good, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're grateful.
So it's almost like there has to be an active component to it. So appreciating something would be like a passive, like, I'm thankful for this, but gratitude is the active, I'm now going to express that.
Yeah, I think gratitude is, as I understand it, is always relational in some way or another. And so there's an expressive, communicative type aspect to it.
Yeah.
So you feel grateful and you say thanks.
Yep.
But then there's other layers to it as well, I think. So there's a sense of perspective that it gives you as well.
Yep.
It means that by saying thanks and by acknowledging it, you're recognizing things like your dependency. You've received a gift or a good from someone that you otherwise didn't have.
Yep.
So in some way, there's a sense of dependency there, and that's where some of the relational aspects come in. And then it opens up all kinds of other things like humility. Gratitude and humility very much go hand in hand. Whether gratitude leads to humility or the other way around, who knows?
Yeah, well, it's probably hard to be grateful if you're not humble.
Yeah.
If you're boastful, egotistical kind of thing,
Exactly.
you're probably not going to be a very gracious person.
Yeah, definitely. So I think gratitude involves all those kinds of things, and that's why gratitude is really simple. Like I think we all know what gratitude feels like. I think most of us would know what gratitude feels like. We all know what ingratitude feels like, because maybe we've given a gift to someone and they've just either thrown it back in our face or they've just
haven't acknowledged it at all,
it or anything like that. So I think gratitude is very difficult to define, I think, because it actually opens up so many other areas of life and it has so many layers to it. But the reality is, I think each of us can identify gratitude and say that's what gratitude feels like or is or looks like.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of simple definition, for want of a better word, that you quoted about recognizing the good, that immediately starts to make so much sense about why it's talked about in this kind of mental health context. Because if you're anxious, if you're going through a depressive episode kind of thing where you can't focus on much else besides what the current difficulties that are in front of you, actively trying to practice that gratitude, so actively trying to recognize the good, does start to pull your mindset out of that a bit and start to, like you say, it helps bring about a change of perspective and things like that. So, which makes sense. Like, I don't see that there being anything wrong with that. Yeah. I think that's probably a really good way for us all to be living our life. But how does it look like as a Christian? Because I'm guessing as Christians, we're probably not supposed to... I'm guessing as Christians, the idea of recognizing the good is not necessarily just looking around and I'm grateful for my friends, I'm grateful for my job, I'm grateful for my footy team won on the weekend kind of thing and I got some joy out of that or anything like that. How does gratitude differ then perhaps from a Christian perspective?
Yeah, I think there's that aspect of the relational aspect of gratitude. And I think that looks quite different for a Christian to a non-believer. So I'd want to say that anyone, whether they know Jesus or not, can be grateful.
Yeah.
But I think for a Christian, there is whether you want to say deeper or further aspect to it, because they are a Christian, that changes the way gratitude looks.
Yep.
Because, I can be grateful for the nice things around me. I can be grateful for a nice view. There's a great opening lines of a lecture that was given as a scientific lecture.
Yeah.
And the guy is narrating his introduction. He says, I was looking down a microscope this summer,
Mm-hmm.
and I just had this overwhelming sense of gratitude. I was looking at the layers of rock in a cliff face, and I just had this overwhelming sense of gratitude. I was looking at the neurons in a brain and just had this overwhelming sense of feeling grateful. And it's the opening lines of a lecture by Richard Dawkins, who is a well-known and frankly
Quite
vocal,
Yeah.
very controversial, respected amongst some atheists, disrespected
Yeah.
amongst other atheists for various reasons. But he is certainly never going to acknowledge God
Yes.
at all. So he has this overwhelming sense of gratitude. But for me, I would say there's a missing element there, because who is he grateful to? Because I think we do intrinsically understand that gratitude is a relational thing. We want to express it. We want to show it. We want to write a thank you card or whatever. And so I think for a Christian, we know who we're grateful to. That's, I think, just a really simple, basic difference between a kind of a non-Christian understanding of gratitude and a Christian one, is that we know who we're grateful to. Ultimately, the whole universe is a gift from God. Everything is a gift in that sense. The breath in our lungs right now is a gift of God. There's something to be said for counting your blessings in that sense, and starting from ground zero. And ultimately, the greatest gift is not the things that God has given us, but Himself. And so I think for a Christian understanding of gratitude, well, we know who we're grateful to, and that brings a dynamic to it that I think a general gratefulness maybe lacks. If I can be sort of bold in saying that. And I think that's why gratitude is more than just general positivity. There is a difference there, I think.
Okay, well, that's really interesting, because you could almost think of it just as I'm just focusing on good things to be positive. I'm just thinking positively. That is going to help me change my mindset, help me change my circumstances. But you say there's more to it than just positive thinking. Does that mean that gratitude can be playing out in negative situations, that kind of thing?
Yeah, because I think gratitude, because it sort of changes your sense of perspective, it pulls you through circumstances to look beyond what is maybe happening on the surface.
I kind of get what you're saying, because if you're just trying to think positive, I'm in this really bad situation and I'm just thinking things will get better, eventually things will change, someone might have it worse, trying to change your mindset just by thinking positive thoughts, that doesn't actually do anything to move you forward through that situation. But that gratitude in changing your perspective, you're saying, does actually start to help us in that.
And I think that's where Christian understanding of gratitude is really important, because that understanding of gratitude points us back to God. He's ultimately the one who gets us through circumstances. He's the one who pulls us through. There's a great promise of Psalm 23 that Jesus is always with us, whatever we face, whatever valley we go through. It's less about changing the circumstance, but is giving us the perspective to see beyond the circumstance and the way that God is pulling us through. And I think that it shows there's a place for gratitude in the midst of suffering.
Which is a really counterintuitive concept, that I'm going to be grateful while I am suffering.
It's very counterintuitive. There is a place for gratitude in the midst of suffering. And I think there's probably a few places in the Bible, at least, that we can go to understand that. Let's have a look at a couple of those examples if you're happy to. So I think the most striking example for me is Jesus himself. It's when he's hours away from the cross, and he knows what's coming. He knows what is about to face him. He knows the agony, the torture, the beating, the mocking, the shame that he's about to face. And it's recorded in various bits, but in like Matthew 26, Jesus is with his disciples, with his closest friends, and he gives them the Lord's Supper. Probably wasn't called the Lord's Supper when he was doing it, but he gives them the communion meal. And there's a little detail in there that has always stuck out to me, which is as he breaks the bread and as he pours out the wine, he gives thanks. Now, one option is just to say the cynic is just, it's like Jesus just says grace before his meals. He's the right, he's the good kind of boy who does the right thing, sort of thing. But I think if you're hours away from your death, you know you're going to die. You know what that's going to involve. I don't think you use very many trivial words. I've sat with a man who knew he would probably be dying the next day, and none of the words he said were trivial.
There's that sense of, I know what is coming. I have to make the most of what I am saying now.
Yeah, and so I think when Jesus gives thanks, I think that's very deliberate. I think it's him acknowledging to his Father, even in this midst, like, I can give thanks for something as simple as bread and wine. Now, exactly what that looks like for us is a challenge to think through, but I think it shows there's a space for that. And I think the other one is a classic verse that's become a popular worship song from Job, where Job in chapter 1, all his belongings are taken from him, his family is taken from him, everything is gone. And he says, the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, I don't personally, I don't know if I could say that in that circumstance. That's an incredibly hard thing to say. But he acknowledges the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. And I think the order of those words is really important, because he focuses first on the gift. And then the gifts that have been taken away. He acknowledges the Lord has given. Whatever the circumstance, like, all of this stuff has been taken away. But in a really simple sense, at least at one point I had it. The Lord gave. And so blessed be the name of the Lord, because I think Job recognizes in that moment the Lord is a good God. Who has given. Despite what's going on. And is it a bit of a forethought that the Lord might give again? Yeah, possibly. Yeah. It's interesting as you get to the end of the book of Job, because he acknowledges the giving of God again. But I think there's that sense that blessed be the name of the Lord, like, you are there. You are with me. Jesus can say thank you because he knows his Father is there with him. And I think that's what gratitude is doing. It's pulling you back to see actually God is there. The circumstances may look horrible. Jesus is hours away from his death, but he can still say thanks. And it's kind of reminding you that actually God is still there with you. He may be hard to see. But he is there.
I think one of the things that perspective brings is, again, taking our eyes from the immediate here and now of the negative, the suffering, the everything like that, and realizing that there is more, even if right here and now is a difficulty. And I think one of the things you said when we were talking before this interview was about, in looking for the good things, it's not looking to see the good things happening around you, but that the good God is near. And that becomes kind of the difference between just looking for the positivity, but the goodness is that the good God is near and with us in those sufferings. that kind of change of perspective becomes really, really key then, because I think so much of that, both culturally, secularly, as well as, as a person of faith, is that we realize that when we are so introspective or so inwardly focused, we don't actually see the reality of a situation for what it is. And that perspective shift of looking up and looking out, can actually help us to see, as Job says, God gave, he is a God who gives. That has still happened, even though right now God has taken away. And blessed be the name of the Lord. That's really encouraging. Are there other parts in the Bible where it's kind of giving this kind of idea of gratitude in the midst of suffering?
Yeah, I think Paul would be a classic example of someone who expresses in very strong emotions and feelings and knowledge of gratitude. But Paul didn't necessarily live an easy life.
No.
So he's fascinating in terms of gratitude, because often for Paul, gratitude seems to be almost the basic response to God and God's goodness and the gospel. So in a letter like Romans, Paul spends kind of 6 chapters unpacking the grandeur, the majesty, the goodness, the grace of the gospel, of the good news of Jesus Christ. And gratitude seems to be the most basic, intuitive response. He just says, thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. And Paul often does that. And I don't think that's less for me of a deliberate action of Paul.
Okay.
That's just like, wow, how good is God? How good is our Father?
Yeah.
Thank you. And so there's this overwhelming sense, I think, of gratitude. And Paul's interesting because he also talks about gratitude almost as a global thing. So in 1 Thessalonians 5, he says, give thanks in all circumstances. It's like universal gratitude. It's yes, be grateful for specific things. There's a place for that, but there's also this just overwhelming sense of gratitude. And it's interesting in Thessalonians because he says that's the will of God for us, is to give thanks.
Yeah, wow.
So it's a wonderful thing that kind of psychologists and scientists and all kinds of different people have found that gratitude is a really positive thing and has a positive effect on our well-being. Yeah. And I think, yes, amen, because actually the Bible tells us that gratitude is a good thing. Yeah. It will have these effects because that's God's will. And God's will for us is always good. So Paul is a fascinating character, but there's also points where Paul gives thanks or encourages thanksgiving in the midst of suffering, and possibly in the midst of what we might describe as anxiety or depression, or using those kind of words. So I guess Philippians chapter 4 contains a very
well-known verse.
A very well-known verse. We've heard it probably on the podcast if we've been listening.
We have, yes.
So I'll read it. Philippians 4, verse 6, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. It's a verse that's stuck on fridge magnets, front of Christian gratitude journals. Go into any Christian bookshop and you'll find a gratitude journal. Go into Kiki K or Milligram or wherever, you'll find a gratitude journal right there in the front. Do not be anxious, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. I think to kind of get to grips with that verse, you have to remember firstly where Paul is. He's under arrest, in prison or in house arrest. He's in chains. Life did not probably look that positive for Paul in that moment. He probably didn't know what would face him in the coming days. He just really didn't know. But he says, pray, and with that, give thanks. Philippians is known as the letter where Paul kind of says, rejoice, rejoice, rejoice all the way through. But here he says, do not be anxious, but give thanks. So the question is, what is Paul doing there?
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things you could look at, is it like a command to not be anxious? Because that's kind of difficult to hear, I think, if you're in the midst of feeling anxious.
Yeah.
Whether that's an ongoing thing or just a kind of situational thing. But I think the reason why Paul includes gratitude there, or thanksgiving, as he puts it, is because it points us, as we pray, to the God who is good, who is there, who we can pray to.
Yep.
And I think the really key bit of that verse is actually what comes before, which is hardly ever quoted whenever this is quoted, which is the end of verse 5. It says, let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious.
Yeah.
So we quote verse 6 just by itself,
Yeah.
which I just think is really unhelpful most of the time.
Yeah.
It's the Lord is near. Do not be anxious.
Because immediately that just changes the context entirely of how that verse is sometimes being misused, perhaps, or has led to, as you say, more hurt or more hindrance in someone's recovery, kind of thing, when they're just told, don't be anxious, don't be anxious.
Yeah.
But immediately bringing that into the context of the Lord is near, and therefore don't be anxious because he's near.
Yeah, exactly. He's there. He's with you. And if gratitude, as I've suggested, this kind of relational thing, that gratitude, like Sheldon and Penny, Sheldon feels this overwhelming sense of gratitude and wants to express it, and that literally physically takes him to Penny and means he gives her a hug. Like there's a power in gratitude there that draws the two people together. And so as we pray, we're acknowledging that God is good, that he's there, he's with us, and he is near. And gratitude being that relational thing, the kind of relational glue, as such, kind of draws you to him. And so, do not be anxious because the Lord is near. And gratitude is going to play a part in reminding you of that, because it reminds you that he's there, he's giving to you in those circumstances. Yeah,
that's a big mindset shift, I think, and hopefully freeing for people that might have not perhaps considered it that way. So you were mentioning about how, you walk into any bookshop, any stationery place, there's gratitude journals. That's kind of how we're told to practice gratitude, is to be writing down the things we are grateful for, to record the things we're grateful for. How as Christians should we then, is there a practical aspect of gratitude as Christians that we should be practicing or acting out?
Yeah. The first thing I'd say is no.
Simple, done.
And I'll explain that. It's easy to look at a thing like gratitude and say, okay, I must be grateful. I must go to KKK. I must buy my gratitude journal. I must sit down and thank Jesus for 5 things I'm grateful for.
Write it every evening before bed.
Exactly. Paul says, almost take that verse out of context in Thessalonians. Give thanks in all circumstances. That's what Paul's saying. So I must be grateful. I must practice gratitude. I hope it brings hope to people that that's not just a to-do list task for us as Christians. The thing that changes us, the thing that will make us grateful, is acknowledging God's grace to us, God's gift in himself, in Jesus, to us. It's God who changes us, not our practice of gratitude. There is, I think, a really firm line to draw there, I think. Gratitude will make a difference only because it's acknowledging God's grace, and it's God's grace that then changes us. And I think in some ways that's why gratitude is so powerful, because grace is powerful. And it's also why gratitude in some ways is when you start looking for good things around, when you start looking how God has been positive in your life. That's why gratitude has quite an easy effect.
Yep.
So psychologists have found that gratitude actually has a surprisingly positive effect, even in quite small doses.
Yeah. Okay.
It doesn't take much to practice gratitude.
Yeah.
Good look at what it means to practice gratitude, but there's this sense in which I would always want to say to someone, don't just think you need to sit in your room and just come up with things to be grateful for. Just take a moment, look at who God is. His grace will change you. And so it's less about practicing gratitude.
Yeah.
Despite being someone who's writing about gratitude, I would say it's less about practicing gratitude. It's more about looking for the good and looking at how God has been good to us.
So what about in your own life then? Has there been a particular time where you've noticed the effect that gratitude has had in making that kind of positive change or helping you, be a bit better? Or
Yeah, I think I guess just use one example of a very tiny gift of God that made a big difference. I remember many years ago, my wife was feeling unwell. It was Christmas Eve. We went to kind of a walk-in GP clinic thing. This was back in the UK, and we were waiting there for an hour. There's loads of people there. She fainted.
which is a good way to make sure you get seen first.
Very good way to suddenly get a lot of attention very quickly. So that was very helpful from that perspective. Got us right to the front of the queue. She fainted. They checked all her vital signs, SATs and stuff like that. I'm not sure. And they were alarmed. They felt something was wrong.
Yep.
So they called an ambulance, and we rushed off to the hospital. I was in the car, so Katie was in the ambulance. I was in the car. We got to the hospital. It's Christmas Eve. We were due to go visit her family and stuff for Christmas. You don't really want to spend Christmas Eve in hospital. They said we're going to keep you in for observations and see what's going on. They really didn't know what was wrong. So there was that sense of unknown, of this kind of uncertainty of what was happening. And we didn't have any family kind of in the close area at that point, and didn't really know what to do. Most of our friends it was Christmas, so they got to see their families, etc. So I felt sort of quite isolated in a sense. So uncertainty, not knowing what to do, not knowing what would happen, that feeling of isolation. And then I couldn't stay overnight in the hospital. I had to go back to our apartment, and so I walked down to the car park, got to the ticket machine, realised the credit card thing wasn't working, and I had no cash or anything. It was Christmas Eve. The place was deserted. There were no staff around, no shops open. There was no one else in sight. And I thought, well, how do I get out of the barrier? I tried calling the car park attendant and stuff, and no answer. So I was just stuck. And some people would put it down to coincidence, but I thought I'll check the little loose change thing at the bottom at the machine, and there was a £2 coin, which was exactly the price of the parking, just sitting there in the little return change thing. And I just, in that moment, had this overwhelming sense of gratitude. It wasn't a sense of gratitude that I cultivated or practiced. It was just this instant, intuitive, thank you, Jesus, because otherwise I'm just stuck in this car park and I don't know how I get out. Some people would say it's coincidental, but for me that was God providing just what I needed right there in that moment. And up till then, I probably hadn't really prayed or thought about God up until that moment. Like Katie was ill, that was the priority before me. And so suddenly when that little coin was there, I could put it in the machine, I could get out, I could get home. It just reminded me that God was there and I could pray.
Yeah.
And that was a tiny, tiny gift of God, but in the circumstance, it was a pretty big gift. But actually, the bigger gift was that I had that overwhelming sense of gratitude that reminded me I can, like Paul says, pray with thanksgiving. I could speak to God of the anxiety I was feeling in that moment. And that's, I guess, an example of just a tiny thing, but the sense of gratitude that it gave me was that it changed my perspective. It took my eyes from the circumstance and reminded me who God is.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. So is gratitude something that we just practice in the here and now, or in the instance that something happens and helps us to be grateful? Or is it something that can be applied retrospectively?
Yeah. So there's quite a lot of interesting psychological studies about looking at gratitude and memory.
Okay.
And I find that interesting because actually I think that's quite a common thread in the Bible. There's a sense in which gratitude and memory go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I think that's because often we are feeble humans and we're not that great at recognizing gifts sometimes in the moment.
Yep.
Particularly if that moment is a moment of suffering. We're potentially not going to be great at looking in that moment at the things that we can be grateful for. And so I think God is very gracious to give us this sense that we can look back at a situation with hindsight, which is a wonderful thing, and see what we can be grateful for. And it's interesting, psychologists talk about looking back and the effect in the here and now that sense of gratitude for past things can have. So I find that really interesting. So like, in terms of examples, like Psalm 9 says, I will give thanks to you, Lord, with all my heart. I will tell of your wonderful deeds. Now, I don't think that's wonderful deeds that God is doing necessarily right now. That's deeds that God has done.
Yeah.
Just like Job, the Lord has given and has taken away. It's a sense of looking back. And sometimes that's described as gratitude recasting. So the idea is you can take a situation or a memory, something from the past, and in a sense, with gratitude, recast that thing.
Yeah, wow.
So I was talking with someone earlier in the week who says they often find it very difficult to be grateful in the moment. But looking back, they can see how the Lord has brought them through something. They can see how actually through circumstances, through people intervening, God was with them. But they struggle to do that in the moment. And I think all of the Psalms often talk about, give thanks to the Lord for he is good. His love endures forever. And then they kind of recount all the ways that God has been faithful to them in the past.
The Lord who brought you up out of Egypt.
Yeah.
Delivered you through the desert. Into the promised land.
Exactly. There's this sense in which you can look back and give thanks in the here and now for the ways that God has helped in the past. And that's also a kind of an easy way into practicing gratitude or becoming more grateful, is if you're struggling to look in the here and now, or just look back how the Lord has brought you through something in the past.
Yeah, that's really cool. So I guess that really helps to take gratitude from a place of just positive thinking then, because gratitude being acknowledging God and what he has done can then look like someone in the midst of a negative mental health episode absolutely crying out to God, but recognizing that you are God and you are with me in this. And even though that might be in the midst of tears and depression and something that would look the furthest from positivity, that can actually be a gratitude as well in that moment.
Absolutely. And that takes us back to Job and his acknowledgement the Lord has given and the Lord has taken away. I don't think he said that with a smile on his face. True. I don't think that was a generally positive moment for him. But he is grateful.
Mm.
And so gratefulness might not look like just sheer positivity. It may just be acknowledging that, God, you're there.
Yeah.
I'm pretty certain you're there. Maybe it's one of those, it's qualified a
Yeah.
bit because of the
Yep.
circumstances you're in.
Yeah.
But God, you're there. Thank you for being there.
Mm.
And it may just be really hard to see the things that we can be grateful for in a situation. But hopefully, by His Spirit, He's showing you He's there.
Yeah.
And you can see that, and you can just be grateful to Him. You can be grateful for the gift of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is gratitude then something we should be growing in? Is it something that it's not just a binary state of we're either not grateful or grateful?
Yeah.
Is it something we have to develop and learn and grow?
Yeah. Yeah, because gratitude is... so scientists have found... try and distinguish between people who are grateful and people who practice gratitude.
Okay.
And generally, like a psychologist who's using a gratitude practice is going to be trying to help someone become more grateful, so that they're more like, sometimes described as dispositional gratitude.
Okay.
That you're growing in your general day-to-day level of being grateful. But sometimes that takes action. So there's things called like gratitude interventions.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which sound very dramatic.
Yeah.
And they're used by all kinds of people. There are medical doctors who use them in hospitals, even with patients after surgery. So patients who have undergone gratitude interventions actually recover faster.
Oh, wow.
Than people who haven't. This is all kinds of fascinating, kind of very biological things about the power of gratitude. But what they do is they use these gratitude interventions, and they take various forms. They can be something like writing a letter to all the medical staff who did your surgery and your pre-surgery care or whatever. That might be getting a gratitude journal and acknowledging the things that you're grateful for. Those are gratitude interventions that anybody can do, that then can, in effect, begin to grow a habit of gratitude.
Yeah.
And can grow you in that sense. Because sometimes you need that kind of deliberate action, a deliberate practical thing to help you grow in something.
Yep.
But I think as Christians, hopefully that kind of practical action will grow that sense of general gratefulness, so that we do, in a sense, grow in gratitude as we do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So then I guess kind of to kind of wind things up a little bit then, if someone is, and I know you're not a psychologist, and I know you're not someone that is, frontline helping people as they are going through struggles, but just from what you've read, what you've studied, what you've understood, it for someone who is going through something difficult, is there a simple way they can just start to focus on that gratitude, or is there a simple kind of first step towards gratitude they can kind of take?
Yeah, I think particularly as a believer, there's, in a sense, whilst it might be hard to think through and always acknowledge, we can always be thankful that God is there and is with us, whether we always see His presence clearly or not.
Yep.
He is there. And a really simple thing is just as hard as prayer can be sometimes.
Yeah.
Prayer can just be as simple as, Father, I don't know what's going on here, but thank you that I can pray.
Yeah.
Thank you that I have some form of relationship with you, that I can turn to you. And that simple sense of acknowledgement may just be all we can do in a situation.
Yeah. But hopefully it is perhaps that beginning first step of lifting our eyes from our own situation and lifting our eyes to Him.
Yeah, definitely.
Stephen, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing with us. I think it's something that we all need to be reminded to be grateful and what to be grateful for. So yeah, I hope this has been an encouragement for people. So yeah, I appreciate everything you've shared with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. If it was helpful or encouraging, we'd love for you to drop a like on it and share it around. You can see way more content on our website, anxiousfaith.org, where you can listen to each episode of the podcast, find more resources, and read our blog all around mental health and faith. Be sure to also follow us on socials via the links in the description and subscribe to our channel so you can be kept in the loop when we're dropping more content for you. Thanks so much, and God bless.